Starting us off at number 10 is The Exorcist. I would be doing an injustice if I didn't start with one of the scariest movies of all time. And why was it the scariest movie of all time? Because it was one of the scariest books of all time. Written by William Peter Blatty and published in 1971, the book takes place in Washington, D.C. and follows demonically possessed 12-year-old Regan MacNeil, who is also the daughter of a very famous actress. The duo are in Georgetown whilst the mother is filming when Regan becomes sick. Weird things start happening around the house, which her mother tries to find rational explanations for, and Regan's condition intensifies and deteriorates. Nothing helps her until the mother gives in and turns to a priest for help. A pair of priests spend the whole book trying to exorcise the demon, and it was actually based off of a real case of possession William heard about in the 50s. I don't want to go into more detail and include spoilers because if you haven't read it, you definitely should. I feel like scary books scare you in a way that movies just can't. When I used to read them at home alone, I physically could not continue reading because I was scared. I was scared of reading. Like, that is a real fear, people. Coming in at number 9 is Blindness. Written by Jose Saramago and published in 1995, the book follows an unnamed city or country that's been afflicted with an unexplainable epidemic of blindness. And since most people there go blind, a social and economic breakdown soon follows. The plot involves a group of unnamed characters, and the book is written in really long sentences, and there are no speech marks around the dialogue, so you're also like, wait, who's speaking right now? The first half of the book takes place in a dirty, overcrowded asylum where the group and countless other blind people have been quarantined. And the whole thing descends into anarchy basically. People are worried about the availability of food, necessities, no medicines are allowed inside, so even a small infection could end up deadly. Gangs start forming, they start raping women in exchange for giving them food. It just gets really, really bad. The only person in the land that doesn't get infected was the doctor's wife, and we follow how she has to try and help the group survive. At number 8 we have The Haunting of Hill House. It's not a horror if a haunted house isn't on this list, am I right? Written by Shirley Jackson and published in 1959, the book has been dubbed one of the best literary ghost stories in the 20th century. It went on to become 2 films, a play, and the basis of a Netflix series, so it's safe to say even in the 21st century we are getting a lot of inspiration from it. Shirley even drew the floor plans of the house and its outside before beginning the novel. The plot takes place in a mansion called Hill House and follows 4 main characters. An investigator of the supernatural, Eleanor, a shy girl, and a disabled mother, Theodora, and the mansion's heir, Luke. They all come to the house because of having experienced something paranormal or wanting to investigate the paranormal. The house itself has been the site of many deaths and suicides, and as their stay progresses, creepy things start happening, as they always do. The house itself seems sentient and angry, but the best part of the book is the narrator. We trust Eleanor from the start because she seems quite reliable and sweet, but as the book progresses she becomes more and more unreliable, she starts descending into madness, and then it gets confusing on whether the things happening in the house are really happening, or she's just seeing things or hallucinating them. I'm just gonna leave it at that. Filling our number 7 slot is The Silence of the Lambs. I don't know how I could have made this list and not included Hannibal Lecter. Written by Thomas Harris and published in 1988, the book is actually a sequel about the forensic psychiatrist and cannibalistic serial killer Dr. Hannibal Lecter. First of all, has anyone seen the show Hannibal? I watched the first season. I could literally only watch 1 episode a day, not even binge it, because it was just too taxing watching such screwed up things happen for so long. Like, I used to have to mentally prepare before watching it. But anyway, at this point Hannibal is already in jail, so the plot follows an FBI trainee called Clarice who is given the task of drawing up psychological profiles of serial killers, starting with Hannibal. Well, that's what she's told, but her real mission that she doesn't know about is to try and get Hannibal's help identifying a new serial killer on the loose dubbed Buffalo Bill. The plot follows her periodically visiting Hannibal and probing him about the killer. He gives her cryptic clues in exchange for knowing about her disturbing childhood as an orphan. This book won 2 awards for Best Novel, and it's a literary gem. I haven't met anyone who hasn't heard of The Silence of the Lambs. Like, they wouldn't even know what it is, but they would have heard of it for sure. Now at number 6 is Carrion Comfort. Written by Dan Simmons and published in 1989, it won the Locust Poll Award for Best Horror Novel, the Bram Stoker Award, and the August Derleth Award for Best Novel. Stephen King even calls it one of the greatest horror novels of the 20th century, so based on that, I reckon it's a pretty good book. The book focuses on a fraction of humanity who has intense psychic powers called the Ability. These people can control someone from a distance, and I mean control them, like physically too, as in they could make someone commit murder if they really wanted to. Killing someone indirectly gives the Ability users energy and youth, so they're almost like pseudo-vampires. The book sets up the fact the abilities have been used throughout time, whether that's fake charisma of a world leader, everyday murders, or the Holocaust. Although it's split into many timelines, it mostly follows a group of immoral people in the 80s, some of which want to take over the world. Investigators pursue a series of murders and realize these people really need to be stopped. It's honestly brutal. They get together in one scene and talk about all the people they killed, including John Lennon, and then later on two of them end up fighting but use normal humans around them as soldiers to fight each other. It's screwed up, but isn't every book on this list? Coming in at number 5 is A Head Full of Ghosts, written by Paul G. Tremblay and published in 2015. The book follows an American family that's troubled. The dad is unemployed, they barely have any money, and then things get even worse due to the mental illness of their 14-year-old daughter, Marjorie. The book is told from the perspective of Marjorie's 8-year-old sister, Mary, and it starts when Marjorie starts telling Mary macabre stories instead of innocent Dr. Seuss ones. Welcome to the real world, Mary. Anyway, the dad, who is a born-again Catholic, decides Marjorie doesn't have a mental illness, she's demonically possessed, two very different things, and so he gets the help of his priest to try and exorcise her. And let's just say Marjorie is not really telling the truth. I'll leave it at that. At number 4 is Let the Right One In. Written by John Lindqvist and published in English in 2008, the book is essentially a vampire story, but it's not like Twilight, before you guys just skip number 4. And for the record, I just like to say I read all the Twilight books and the books were actually really good. Please do not base the series on Kristen Stewart's acting, thank you. But anyway, the plot follows a 12-year-old boy called Oscar, a vampire child called Eli, and its caretaker Hakan. The story takes place in Stockholm in the 80s and focuses on a plethora of disturbing things like pedophilia, self-mutilation, murder, bullying, genital mutilation, etc. Oscar becomes friends with Eli when it moves in next door, and he finds out Eli was turned into a vampire when they were a child and hence forever remains in a young body and mind. Hakan, Eli's caretaker, was a former teacher who got caught with child pornography, and as you can imagine, he's very much in love with Eli and goes out and kills people and gets blood for them in order to sustain them in exchange for money. Even though Hakan would do it for free if Eli would let them be physically intimate, but we all know that's not gonna happen. The story goes on when Hakan gets caught on his last blood-procuring mission, and things just get worse and worse from there. Death, murder, acid throwing, blood drinking, the book has it all, and it was adapted into 2 feature films. Filling our number 3 slot is The House of Leaves, and this one is hard because half the people who've read it say it's a horror story, and the other half say it's a love story, and I mean there is horror in love and vice versa, so can it be both? But anyway, written by Mark Danielewski and published in 2000, the book itself is incredibly confusing. It has footnotes, and those footnotes have their own footnotes. Some pages just have a few words or a line of text. Some pages you have to rotate the book so you can actually read it. Some pages words are arranged in a way that mirror the story, but basically the format of the book is meant to make you feel claustrophobic. The plot has many narratives, but mostly follows a tattoo parlor employee called Johnny. Johnny's looking for a new apartment when his friend recommends a place in his building from a man who just died. When moving in, he finds an academic manuscript written by that man about a film called The Navidson Record. Except Johnny can't find any evidence of the film ever existing. The main plot focuses on the Navidson family story. The family come home from a trip one day and find that their house is expanded internally, but externally it looks exactly the same. There are more rooms, hallways upon hallways, and all of them are featureless and unlit, and there always just seems to be a low growl sound in the house. Characters start exploring the house and venture into the endless passageways, which ultimately leads to murder, insanity, and death. Now the second plot takes place in the footnotes, and it's about what's happening in Johnny's life, and it gets more and more unclear whether his obsession with the manuscript and consequent paranoia and delusions are because of madness, drug use, or the manuscript itself. The third and final mini-plot are letters woven in from Johnny's mother, who's in a psychiatric hospital. Honestly, with this book you really end up doubting your own perception of the story and what's fact and what isn't, and honestly, what more can you want from a book? Especially a horror book. Now at number 2 is It. Written by Stephen King, which I'm sure you all already knew, and published in 1986, It is iconic. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the book since the movies are all out as well, and regardless of whether you've seen them or not, I feel like everyone knows what it's about. The story follows a group of kids that call themselves the Losers Club. The kids realize they all encountered the same shape-shifting entity which took the form of their biggest fears. They named the thing It because they had no idea what it was. It wasn't human, it was genderless, it was it. They figure out it is behind all the child murders happening in the town, and they try to stop the evil clown. There's even a bit where Pennywise itself is narrating and telling the reader where it came from. The book is split into two timelines taking place 30 years apart, so we see the club as kids in the first one, and then we see them return to Derry in the second one because there's been another slew of child murders. I can't even count the amount of times people have recommended it to me and told me it genuinely scared the living hell out of them, and I still refuse to read it. I'm just not gonna do it. That's not me. And finally, at number 1 is Rosemary's Baby. Written by Era 11 and published in 1967, the book sold over 4 million copies, and that made it the best-selling horror novel of the 60s. The plot follows Rosemary Woodhouse and her struggling actor husband Guy, who recently move into an old Gothic apartment building. Despite being warned about the building's strange history involving murder and witchcraft, they move in anyway. And the couple are quickly welcomed by neighbors Minnie and Roman, who Rosemary gets a weird vibe from. Due to some freak accident blinding his theatrical rival, Guy gets a great role and agrees to try for their first kid. Hurrah! But not. But that night, Rosemary has a sexual dream involving an inhuman creature, and the next day she has claw scratches all over her boobs, on her crotch, basically everywhere. And then somehow she becomes pregnant, but then falls severely ill, losing more and more weight and craving raw meat. Everything goes tits up, and I can 100% say Guy is not the father. Starting us off with number 10 is The Incest Diary. I told you guys it can appear in any video, always be prepared for it. Published in 1999, the book goes into excruciating detail about a girl's incestuous relationship with her dad. The abuse began when she was 14 and lasted till her late 20s. Wow. The woman even tried going to the police to file charges against her dad, but the officer said it had been too long and that she should just write her story down. Justice, the police, it's nothing, he said. And so she did. She wrote a book. The book goes from flashbacks to her childhood to adulthood. It has her inner monologues that contradict themselves constantly. Her manic fixations are clear in the book, and she goes into detail about how it informed every single thing she ever did, how she sought the abuse and reenacted it in other relationships, how if anything she started craving the abuse. The book sold more than 70,000 copies in France in the first 3 months after its release. I mean, it's dark, it's graphic, and it's anonymous. Coming in at number 9 is A Woman in Berlin. This one came out in English in 1954, and it's said to be memoirs of an anonymous German woman. It covers April to June 1945 when the Red Army occupied Berlin. The woman is a journalist, and she goes on to describe really dark subject matter like getting gang raped by Russian soldiers and trying to survive in the situation by dating a Soviet officer, and how other girls had to make similar decisions. Women literally had no protection from anyone at that time, so it really was eat or be eaten. When it was first published in Germany, it was met with a lot of disgust since it was just too soon to talk about the German suffering, but 2 years after Hitler died, the book was republished and was on the bestsellers list for more than 20 weeks. The author was actually revealed in 2003 posthumously by Jens Bisky, a literary editor. She identified the author to be Marta Hillers, and Marta's publisher was absolutely livid at the invasion of privacy that had caused. I don't get why people can't just let other people remain anonymous. Like, can everyone just live their lives and stop interfering in other people's lives? That'd be great. At number 8 we have Go Ask Alice. Now this book was published anonymously in 1971, and it revolves around the diary of a girl who gets addicted to drugs at 15 and then runs away from home. It's funny, when I saw this book in a bookshop a few years ago, I really wanted to read it, but I had way too many unread books at the time on my shelf, so I didn't get it, but it's ironic, it's popped up into my life once again. But anyway, the book follows this girl as she goes through heartbreak, intense drug use, rape, body image, social acceptance, etc. It's sort of a coming of age story if anything, but laser focused on drugs. She basically moves city due to her dad's job and goes home one summer to stay with her grandparents. She attends a party, she tries a drink laced with LSD unknowingly, and so begins the journey of drugs. If you're interested in the title of the book, it's actually referencing a song called White Rabbit, which is alluding to Alice in Wonderland. Alice eats and drinks a bunch of things that change her size, so they're kind of linking that to a drug experience. But there is a twist, and it's not the book's ending. Controversy sparked in the 70s because of Beatrice Sparks and people thinking she was the author of the book. She was initially credited as the editor, but then records showed she was the sole author, and then apparently it was the diary of a deceased teenager. I mean, it's really all over the place, but the book does look amazing, but also scarily real. Filling our number 7 slot is Diary of an Oxygen Thief, and I've heard of this one too, and the title alone is just hilarious. Aren't we all just low-key oxygen thieves? Rudy. Either way, published in 2006, the book is a Dutch novel also written in the style of a memoir. That's 4 books in a row now that have been memoirs and anonymous. Honestly, people want to reveal their dirty secrets but not want to reveal themselves. It is what it is, guys. Either way, the book is about an Irish man who is an alcoholic and who takes pleasure in emotionally abusing women. What a catch. The man regrets his past relationships as the book goes on, and as he changes jobs, he moves to the US where culture shock happens, addiction and paranoia happens, love happens, everything just goes down, and the book isn't even that long. Self-deprecating humor is the book's forte. I mean, oxygen thief. The narrator doesn't even think he's worth the air he breathes, so I mean, is he or isn't he? Guess we'll have to read it to find out. Now at number 6 is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and the plot of this low-key sounds really good, like it could be the next historical film starring Saoirse Ronan for sure. Published sometime in the 14th century, the novel, if you couldn't tell from the Arthurian title, is a Middle English chivalric romance. The plot is actually lit, you guys. It follows Sir Gawain, one of King Arthur's knights, who basically agrees to a challenge from a mysterious Green Knight. The challenge is for any knight to cut the Green Knight with his axe, and he then gets to axe the knight back 1 year and 1 day later. Sir Gawain beheads the dude, and he picks up his head and then reminds him he'll be back on the scheduled date. And so starts the story of Gawain trying to stay loyal and chivalrous and courageous about the agreement and the trials and tribulations along with that. Basically, hero goes on quest and gets tested. End plot. That's like Dungeons and Dragons right there. The book itself is written in stanzas and each one ends in a rhyme, so I know it may be a bit hard to read, but for those who are willing, do you. Coming in at number 5 is Might is Right, and this one is definitely gonna anger all our feminists out there, so here's to hoping this seems problematic to everyone watching, hopefully, fingers crossed. Published in 1890, this non-fiction book is a lot to take in. It focuses mostly on social Darwinism, which applies natural selection and the whole survival of the fittest science to human society and politics. He emphasizes how humans are motivated by our own selfish wants, and we base our decisions on the consequences of them rather than if they're morally right or not. He claims only physical strength can lead to moral right and actively bashes democracy and Christianity. He says BS like weakness should be viewed with hatred and that women and families are the property of men since they are more superior. It was even dubbed as proto-fascist white power manifesto, which I'm inclined to agree with. The author went by the pseudonym Ragnar Redbeard, so that's clearly not a real name, but interestingly enough, a white supremacist publisher and the Church of Satan founder both think Jack London wrote the book, and if he didn't, that's a really brutal accusation by some pretty questionable people. At number 4 is the autobiography of an ex-colored man. What a title. The title itself literally had me. I was like, ex-colored man, what does that even mean? Order on Amazon right now. But anyway, published in 1912, the book is a fictional account of a biracial man whose name we never find out since he's always just called the ex-colored man. The story follows his life living in America at the end of the 19th century when things like lynchings were very much still happening. His dream is to glorify black people through ragtime music, but after seeing the way society worked, he started passing as white to make his life easier and safer. He forms a friendship with a character called the Rich White Gentleman, and despite being a free man, there were aspects of slave-master dynamics within this relationship. It was originally published anonymously since the author was a diplomat and wasn't sure how controversial the book could be since issues of race and discrimination weren't really discussed in books back then. When it was republished 15 years later and it did moderately well, the author decided to be credited, and so the book's anonymity died in 1927. James Weldon Johnson is the man of the hour, and if you don't know what that means, that just means he's confuse the author. Filling our number 3 slot is Lazarillo de Tormes. Now this one is actually a Spanish novella that was first published in 1554, probably the oldest book on this list, no doubt. The author chose to remain anonymous because of all the anti-clerical content. The author was living in Spain. I'm sure he had beef with religious authority, interfering in political matters, and wanted to publicize it but also not get hung for it, so fair enough. The book followed an impoverished boy called Lazaro who goes from master to master. He gets more cunning and smart as he changes masters while simultaneously trying to take over his father's practice. The reason this book is so high up on the list is because it's sort of iconic in many ways. It was credited with inventing the picaresque genre, which basically means the adventures of a slightly rogue hero of lower class who uses his wits to survive in a corrupt society. Unsurprisingly enough, the book got banned by the Spanish crown for dissing the Catholic Church and all aristocracy, and only got unbanned in the 19th century. Now at number 2 is Frankenstein. I know, Mary Shelley, we know she wrote it, don't come for me. She started writing it at 18 and published it at 20. Can you imagine publishing one of the most renowned pieces of gothic fiction at the age of 20? What were we doing at 20? Freaking twiddling our thumbs and playing Temple Run on our iPads probably. Oh, that's what I was doing at 20. Actually, no it wasn't. Cut that out, editor. When it was originally published in 1818, it was done so anonymously for many reasons probably. I mean, she was 20 for one, who's gonna take a 20-year-old seriously? Her dad was a very famous author, so maybe it was also the pressure of living up to that she didn't want, or maybe if it didn't do well, she just didn't want anything to do with it. Many actually thought her husband Percy wrote it since he's the one who wrote the introduction for it. When its second edition was published in 1823, that's actually when she appeared as the author. The novel was met with great success, which let the family move to Italy and get lit, really. Actually, no, it wasn't lit, her life was very tragic, but yeah, here's to Mary Shelley. And finally, at number 1 is Novel with Cocaine or Cocaine Romance. This one weirdly caught my attention because it's so vague. I was trying to gather as much info about it as I could, but it was actually quite hard. Published in 1934, it's a Russian psychological novel which explores ideology, and I mean it was Russian. Communism ideology was important at the time. It explores philosophy and psychology all through the veil of a teen's cocaine addiction. We follow Vadim through school, his experiences with women, what his life is like, what he thinks of everything pre-cocaine, and then obviously after. When it was published, the author was M. Agiev, and that's meant to be the pseudonym for Russian author Mark Levi, but this has never been confirmed, and so it still remains anonymous to this day.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have The Lesser Key of Solomon. This is a grimoire that is said to be cursed. It is said to contain spells that are used for summoning over 72 different demons, and just to add a little air of mystery, no one is exactly sure who wrote it. This is because the book is made up of a few different texts that have been compiled from somewhere around the 17th century. This book is said to be so cursed that even just having a copy of it will cause the owner to either experience constant bad luck or have the worst luck of all with passing away. People have shared their terrifying stories with the book, and they include the book's pages turning on their own, and another person shared that the book violently flew itself across the room at them. How terrifying would that be? While we aren't sure who wrote it, there are rumors or stories that suggest it might have been King Solomon. It is said that perhaps he wrote it for his son and then asked him to bury it with him in his grave. When being prepared for burial, a group of Babylonian philosophers found the book, and this is when they were visited by an angel who told them to hide the book from the unworthy. They then placed a spell on the book which was meant to keep it from getting into the wrong hands, and that is said to be how the book got its curse. In our number 9 spot today, we have The Untitled Grimoires. A witch's spellbook should never be messed with. I feel like that should be obvious, but I'll put that out there because apparently it isn't. The Untitled Grimoires are a set of handwritten spellbooks that were sold online for $14,000 in 2013. The books were written in the 1960s by a high priestess of Wicca who was the leader of a coven, and they detail things like spells, incantations, enchantments, and instructions on summoning spirits and demons. So, witch stuff. This is all fine and well unless you're sitting here thinking about how you don't believe. If you are a non-believer, it is best to stay as far away as possible from these books. The seller of the books warned that any non-believers who mess with the book will bring upon themselves a deadly curse, and on the first page of the book, the Wiccan herself wrote that proceeding with the book may have serious consequences. It reads, quote, "To those not of the craft, the reading of this book is forbidden. Proceed no further, or justice will exact a swift and terrible retribution, and you will surely possibly suffer at the hand of the craft. That's a pretty sound warning, and one I probably wouldn't just roll the dice on. You know, just to be safe. In our number 8 spot today, we have The Sorrows of Young Werther. We've got a lot of books on this list that are said to contain magic and spells, and this one is a little different from the others on this list because it doesn't. This is a book that came out in 1774, and it is said to have had a large and negative impact on its readers since its release. Apparently, after this book came out, a huge wave of its readers ended up taking their own lives because of this strange and dark influence it had on those who read it. Young men would start trying to emulate the main character of the book by dressing like him, acting like him, that sort of thing, before following his horrifying actions in the book. This actually led to the book being banned in some countries, and for the most part, I'm pretty opposed to the banning of books, but I feel like this is one I can probably get behind. It is believed that even people who were in a completely fine headspace prior to reading the book would still be tempted to follow the dark path after reading it, which is exactly what has led people to believe that this book is cursed. In our number 7 spot today, we have The Picatrix. This is a grimoire that is said to contain a large amount of magic that is presumed to be from the 11th century. This text has long been considered pretty obscene because of the graphic content that exists within it. The pages contain some scholarly work with philosophy, astrology, and even some medieval science, which is actually pretty cool. But then there are things like recipes for concoctions that involve mixing human and animal blood, brains, urine, and other bodily fluids in with or other kinds of dangerous substances. The results are said to be magical, but I am far from convinced. This one definitely isn't the darkest or the spookiest on this list today, which is a nice refresher, and while some of what this book contains is definitely historically interesting, I think it's probably best to stay away from the magic and spells that lurk within. In our number 6 spot today, we have The Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. This book was of course created by Abramelin, who was indeed a mage, and he created it as a gift for his son. At the time, his son was probably like, a book for my birthday? Thanks, I guess. Books are intimidating. Like, no one really liked Holes the first time they read it. Actually, that's a lie. That's still one of the best books I've ever read. But I bet his son was like Harry Potter with the Half-Blood Prince potions textbook, you know? At first you don't really know what to make of it, but that stuff comes in handy later. Anyway, in the early 1900s, this book was translated into English, and that is when the rumors of the book being cursed began to spread. I mean, this book contained spells, but it also contained curses, so I feel like that rumor likely makes a lot of sense. It is said that this rumor has to do with Abramelin's belief that everyone has their own personal demon. I'm just hoping that mine is cool and nice. The good thing about this book, however, is that it holds instructions on how to get your demon under control through rituals and supernatural situations, but then the kicker with this is that it is always exceptionally risky to reach out to the spirit world, so maybe that's why everyone was feeling like this book is cursed. It's looking like unless you absolutely know what you're doing, the contents of this book just might be too powerful. Those who have had bad experiences with the book explained either bad luck or hauntings from the spirit world are what await for those who dare to read it. In our number 5 spot today, we have The Book of Black Magic and Pacts. This book, written by A.E. Waite, is an exhaustive guide to all things occult. It looks at lore, magic, occultist history, and ceremonies. There's certainly no issue with this itself, but when in the wrong hands, things can certainly get a little dicey, especially considering this book has been referred to as one of the greatest overviews of occultism, and it includes a large number of magical spells from a variety of sources. This book is said to also contain rituals of transcendental magic and rituals of black magic. The author of this book, A.E. Waite, is said to have been a British scholarly mystic as well as a poet, and it is said that he was quite a prolific writer on both occult and esoteric matters. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Codex Gigas. This book is said to give the reader the ability to harness evil and negative energy, and is also often referred to as the Devil's Bible. This book was first discovered in 1648 and is massive at 36 inches tall, 20 inches wide, and 8.7 inches thick, and here's what's weird. It weighs 165 pounds. It is said that this book was actually written by a monk, but this monk had broken his spiritual vows. He was of course punished, but in a pretty extreme way, which was to be sealed behind a wall and then left there to die. Right before his passing, he realized he wouldn't be able to finish the book, which is when he then summoned Lucifer and asked him to complete it for him. If I knew you could do that, I would have summoned Lucifer to finish all my book reports in school. I guess I probably wouldn't have been cool with the whole selling your soul thing though. It is said that this book is filled with dark rituals, instructions on how to perform exorcisms, as well as a bunch of creepy drawings of the devil and other demons. Right now it is said that this book has 310 pages, but that it once used to have 320. The 10 pages that were ripped out were said to contain instructions on how someone could summon the devil, so hopefully whoever had those 10 pages destroyed them right away. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Grand Grimoire. This book is often referred to as the book with incredible power and has been called one of the darkest books in the world. While the author of this book is still unknown, the contents of it are things like black magic and dark, spooky secrets. It is believed that the book was written sometime around 1521, and it is split into 2 books. Book 1 details instructions on how to summon a demon and how to get the demon to do your bidding. The second book is split into 2 parts, and it details how to make a pact with a demon and how to command the spirit, but with less tools, which means it is significantly riskier than the instructions in the first book. Apparently in the book it even details how someone can call upon Lucifer or the devil, so I guess who needs those 10 missing pages in the Codex Gigas? Just go out and get the Grand Grimoire and you're right back in the devil summoning game, no worries. The book describes a few different demons, and it also gives spells that one can do for things like winning the lottery, love spells, becoming invisible, you know, magic stuff. While those spells certainly sound nice, magic like that always comes at a cost. People fear the Grand Grimoire because they worry that if anyone reads it fully, then the devil will enslave their soul. No thank you. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Book of Soiga. Anything that is referred to as the Book of Death is definitely one I'll most likely spend some time trying to stay away from. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but that is the least inviting thing I've ever heard in my life. If you don't agree with me on that sentiment, however, the tough thing with this one is that nobody knows exactly what language it is written in. The beginning part of the book definitely contains some spells and incantations. The ending of the book really is where the most mystery lies, and trying to decipher it is no easy task. It is said that a scholar named John Dee once attempted to decode the secret book, and it was so difficult that he needed to call on the angel Uriel for help. Even the angel didn't have the answers and instructed John to call on the archangel Michael, who would be the only one who was able to interpret the text. Here's where this mystery book gets more mysterious though. After John Dee passed away in 1608, the book basically just vanished and no one knew where it went, but then, like magic, it just reappears in the 19th century. Despite this extremely interesting story and how it kind of draws you in like you wish you could crack the code that this book holds, it's best to stay away from because it is said whoever is able to decipher the ending of this book will inevitably die 2.5 years later, so is it really worth it? You don't even get a cool phone call to give you a heads up either. No girl coming out of the well, you just get me telling you on the internet. This is the worst sequel to The Ring ever. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Munich Manual. Also referred to as the Necromancer's Manual, this grimoire comes to us from the 15th century and is a text that is largely focused on demonology and necromancy. A lot of grimoires have both good and dark magic, but this is one that focuses solely on the dark black magic. There are 3 different sections to this one. The first section deals with illusionist magic and spells that trick people into seeing things that aren't there. The next is psychological magic, which is meant to use emotion, politics, and things like that in order to gain power over another individual. And if these 2 weren't scary enough, the third section is divinatory spells, which are meant to allow the reader to see into the past, present, or future. One of the most well-known parts of this book is the part that includes instructions on how to make the Mirror of Lilith, which is for the purpose of divination we just talked about.